first of all, I'd really like to thank you all for being here. I realize it's a busy time for everybody, and we're really, the Pierce County Immunization Coalition has worked really hard putting this program together for you, and we're excited for you to be here. My name is Cindy Smith. I'm the Immunization Program Manager at the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. As you know, we've got a filming crew here. We had a last-minute offer to have this program filmed. Many of your peers who are unable to attend tonight had wanted to have it filmed, and we've always, as a coalition, wanted to have these events filmed. So we're grateful for that opportunity. And so you'll see the filming crew moving around, and they're going to be as inconspicuous as possible.
I was asked to speak today on some of our vaccine programs, and I thought I would just use two as an example, which are the meningitis and rotavirus vaccine programs. I won't say a lot about PATH, but I'll tell you a little bit about PATH. So this is our vision, a world where innovation ensures that health is within reach for everyone. And really, we have three main streams of where we work. Advancing technologies, and that includes vaccines, and that's what I do. Strengthening systems, clearly we have to get innovation out to people, and encouraging healthy behaviors. And you've already been through this. It makes my job easy, but here are some of the places where PATH works, and we are headquartered right here in Seattle. So I'm going to mainly focus on our work in vaccines and immunization, and it really covers a range of work, from increasing the availability of existing vaccines. So one of our first big projects, you know, PATH's been around for 30 years. A lot of people think that we started about when the Gates Foundation came into being, and certainly we've gained a lot more visibility and funding and ability to do more with the Gates Foundation, but PATH was actually around for 30 years, and it started out with a real focus in reproductive health and innovative technologies, and really moved very heavily into vaccines when the Gates Foundation began doing a lot of their work. So some of our first projects were increasing the availability of hepatitis B, you know, in Southeast Asia, where we know there's very high incidence of hepatitis B and subsequent liver cancer. Closing the gap in the uptake of new vaccines, and I'll give the rotavirus example there. Developing new technology, and the meningitis example that I will use talks about that, and working with partners to develop new vaccines. So we don't develop vaccines at our PATH office in Seattle. We do have some laboratories there. We do some diagnostic work. We still do some reproductive health work. Female condoms and other projects are done in our labs. Some of the safe devices, I don't know if you've heard about the Uniject device and other simple safe devices, were actually developed at PATH. But a lot of the work that we do is actually working through partners and bringing partners together. So again, we don't make vaccines at PATH, and I'll give you an example of how we try to bring partners together to get the job done. So if we look at vaccine development at PATH, you know, why are we in this area of vaccine development? Well, some vaccines simply aren't available. You know, malaria vaccines, for example, would fall into that category, while some aren't affordable or available in sufficient quantity. So, you know, the Prevnar vaccine that everybody has in the United States really isn't affordable in other countries. So how can we either work with developing country manufacturers or alternatives to try to get pneumococcal vaccines that are affordable so that all kids can benefit? How do we do it? Again, we don't make the vaccine, so we partner, and this meningitis, I hope, will be a very illustrative example for you with industry, academia. We work a lot with the World Health Organization, developing country manufacturers. You know, our key contributions are really our financial resources, our technical expertise, our human resources, the people that we have, and our partnership facilitation. And again, I hope you see examples of the way we can try to bring people together towards common goals. And that goal is really to accelerate the development of new life-saving vaccines against selective major disease threats, and our focus is the developing world and low-resource countries. So here's just an example of what might inform our strategy. You know, if you look at the global causes of death in children younger than 5 years of age, we know there are about 9 million deaths every year. Of course, most of these are occurring in the developing world, and about 2/3 of these are due to infectious diseases. So a lot of potential if we can target vaccines for infectious diseases. And pneumonia and diarrhea are leading causes of death, and you'll see that we have a number of programs that focus on etiologies for pneumonia and diarrhea. And here are just some examples. I alluded to the pneumococcal vaccine program, diarrheal disease, rotavirus, Shigella, influenza, respiratory syncytial virus. Of course, nobody has a vaccine there yet. Meningococcal, polio, malaria, just many examples. We are very heavily invested in these vaccine programs. So I'm going to start with the first example, which was our meningitis A vaccine project. I don't know if anybody, this actually made the news. Did anybody hear about this in the newspapers or on TV? I mean, this is really our most successful story because it was a vaccine project that was funded right when Bill and Melinda Gates started to invest in these vaccine programs, and it was a 10-year project. So it takes a long time. You really need to be patient with this type of work, and I think it's nice for PATH to have a success now that can be shared and hopefully influence some of the other investments here. But the background to this project, it was created in a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it was set out from the beginning to be a 10-year partnership. So people were realistic. This was going to take some time, and it was going to take some effort. And right from the beginning, you've probably heard that you'll get there faster if you work alone, but you'll get there further if you work with others. And so right from the beginning, this was a partnership with the World Health Organization, and there are a number of other partners who were very heavily involved throughout. And again, sometimes it is faster to work alone, but if you want to make a difference and have something that's sustainable, obviously the World Health Organization was a very critical partner right from the beginning in these efforts. Dr. Mark LaForce, it's always great to have a champion. He was involved in the vaccine world in the U.S. for many years. He worked out of Rochester, was an academic physician. He took on the role of project director, and he stuck it out until the end. Mark actually retired yesterday. So he lived to see the successes that I'll share with you, lived at PATH to see the successes that I'll share with you. And the goal was to eliminate epidemic meningitis as a public health problem in sub-Saharan Africa through the development, testing, licensure, and widespread use of a meningococcal conjugate vaccine. So this is the problem here. I think most of you have probably heard about the meningitis belt in Africa, and here are the countries. The countries in red have the highest rates. We call them hyperendemic countries. The ones in orange also have quite high rates, and you can see there through a period of time from the 1950s up until just a couple years ago, this is clearly epidemic diseases, causes deaths, and also, as you all well know, debilitating sequelae. And so early on with this project, what happened is that Dr. LaForce and his team met with public health authorities in Africa. And they wanted to understand, the leaders in Africa wanted a vaccine. There was demand for this vaccine, but the project wanted to understand the constraints of new vaccine introduction. What is this going to take in Africa? And right from the beginning, they said, price is a high obstacle, and this has to be less than 50 cents a dose to be sustainable. So that was put on the table right from the beginning. And so Dr. LaForce and his team approached multinational vaccine companies and said, can we work with you? And, they really didn't have the interest in developing a product with such a low price. And again, we always say when we work with partners, you may hear about, we have very successful partnerships with industry, a very successful partnership with GSK, for example, on the malaria vaccines. But we don't want companies to go out of business. We're not going to succeed unless they concede. Both have to succeed. And so they said, we don't see this being a good business option for us, and we're not interested. So nobody gave up here. They said, okay, what are the other options for partnerships? And, partnerships can be defined at PATH in a number of ways, but one guiding principle for us is that the collaborations have to lead to a positive impact on availability, accessibility, and affordability of vaccines in developing countries. And so when we negotiate contracts with people, we don't just give them money. We have a number of different ways that we try to ensure this. And again, I'll give you the meningitis as an example, and we have several other examples. So, how was a partnership pieced together for this meningitis A vaccine development model? Well, what happened is, again, this was led by this MVP core team at PATH and the World Health Organization, is they put a partnership together and identified where they could get the raw materials to make a conjugated meninge A vaccine. They went to a developing country manufacturer, which is the Serum Institute of India, who agreed to manufacture this vaccine and agreed to manufacture it for less than 50 cents a dose. But the reason that, there's several reasons why the Serum Institute of India could do that and Big Pharma could not. One is that the investment by PATH and the Gates Foundation and the contribution of these other projects took away the risk and investment that companies generally have to put into vaccine development. So PATH basically said, we're going to pay the research and development costs here. So you won't have this huge negative when we finally get to the end game of making this vaccine. You will not have, they certainly put some investments in. They contributed human resources. They contributed, but they didn't have the huge investments that you generally have with vaccine development. And then there was tremendous help by the US government, CBER, the FDA, who had people who understood the conjugation method, who went to the Serum Institute of India, who did the technology transfer for making this vaccine. So you had these pieces that were brought together, the raw material, the manufacturer, the know-how, working with this organizational team to bring them all together on this vaccine development project. So what happened? This was done over, as I said, I'm describing 10 years now in about 10 minutes and 15 slides. But this conjugation, process development, process optimization, quality control, batch scale up, all of these words that I never knew what they meant before I came to PATH, but the manufacturers and any big pharma reps in the area will know exactly what we're talking about. They were assisted by highly experienced technical consultants every step of the way for this manufacturing process. That was completed by about 2005. So that was a 3 or 4 year period to get to that step. Then there had to be a whole series of clinical trials to test this vaccine from 2005 to 2010, and the decision was made that this is an epidemic disease that affects the whole population. So the original indication would be 1 through 29-year-olds that would get this vaccine. And this vaccine was tested first in India and then sub-Saharan Africa, which was the ultimate target population. And fortunately, because meninge A does have an antibody correlate of protection, these didn't have to be trials with an efficacy endpoint, but with an immunogenicity endpoint. And another important piece of this was the advocacy, the demand creation, the communication, and making sure people understood this vaccine, understood the project, and would embrace it. And there was a big meeting, it's called the Yaoundé Declaration in 2008, where the African health ministers committed to vaccinate 250 million 1 to 29-year-olds and 23 million infants across 25 countries by 2015. So you had the end user committed here, create the demand for this vaccine. So here is the vaccine. You can see it was called Menafravac, was the name that it was given. It's just a meninge A vaccine. So, you know, there are quadrivalent vaccines, of course, but it's really meningitis A that causes the bulk of the disease in this part of Africa. There was talk about starting with a polyvalent vaccine, but the decision was made this would be the quickest initial route to licensure and decreasing disease in this area by starting with this vaccine. So here are some of the highlights. Marketing authorization in India, which is the country of manufacture, was received in January of 2010. WHO pre-qualification, this is really an important step for all of the vaccines we work on. For countries that don't have strong FDAs, the WHO has a quality system where they assess the strength of the country's FDA or national regulatory authority. They go and they do site visits at the manufacturers. And what this ensures for PATH and for the world, that when the meningitis project ends and we don't have all those experts in there anymore paying attention to quality, and if they get the WHO seal of quality approval, that pre-qualification approval, it says first it's a quality vaccine, and unless you have WHO pre-qualification, then UNICEF and Gavi and these other agencies that procure and make vaccines affordable, they pay and help pay for vaccines, they will not buy vaccines from a manufacturer that does not have WHO pre-qualification. So huge, huge step. And it also guarantees quality going out into the future, that there will be periodic checks, et cetera. So Serum Institute of India actually supplies more measles vaccine than any other manufacturer in the world. They supply to Africa, they supply to South America. So this is really a quality company who had WHO pre-qualification before, knew what to do, and was able to achieve that major step. Then in 2010, there were some pilot vaccination campaigns in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. So these countries were selected as introducer countries based on a number of factors, but certainly having the ability and being prepared to conduct these campaigns, having country champions who wanted to conduct these campaigns. And there were countrywide introductions. Over 19.5 million were vaccinated after these pilot campaigns. And this is just one example. This is in Burkina Faso, and I'm told, so this is a little bit of the polar opposite of the lecture that we just heard, people literally lining up wanting this vaccine. And the immunization rates are actually unbelievable. It's a 1 to 29-year-old age group, as I said, 99% coverage. And there had to be a special WHO session actually to talk about pregnant women, because pregnant women wanted this vaccine, and obviously countries wanted to protect their pregnant women, and the decision was made that this was an inactivated vaccine. There was no theoretical reason why it would be harmful, and pregnant women should be included with everybody else in these campaigns. So as I said, there weren't efficacy trials done ahead of time because the vaccine was licensed on immunogenicity, and with an epidemic disease, it may be difficult to do an efficacy trial. So what was done, obviously, was surveillance was set up even years before. While the vaccine is being developed, you're getting your surveillance in place so you know you're prepared, you know you have baseline rates of disease detection, and you can see what happens when you introduce the vaccine. So what this shows here is clearly with something like Men-A, there's great variability from year to year, and you can see that 2008 was a particularly severe year. You can see 2010 there in blue, 2009, and 2011 after the campaign in Burkina through week 14, so just early on in the campaign, was lower than they had historically seen for the last several years. But I think more impressive, because they're meningitis cases, okay, and we don't know what they're due to, is when you look at the actual etiologic diagnosis and surveillance. And I think this tells a really great story. So if you first look at the cases, and again, this is surveillance that was put in place by WHO and PATH, so it's being done in the same way. You don't have bias based on surveillance. You can see again, 3,000 cases, 26,000 cases. The year before introduction, 6,000 cases. The year after, 2,600 cases. So a historic low, although that 2,600 doesn't look a lot different than some of the low years. But what's really remarkable here are the percent due to Men-A. So again, if you just do the math, you've got about 13 total cases of Men-A in 2011 after the introduction of this vaccine. And in fact, not a single one of those cases occurred in a vaccinee. So to date, there have been, how many diseases are you this fortunate with? 0 cases, 0 of Menin-A in vaccinees in these introduction countries. And I have to say, the rotavirus was my project. This is, I'm giving this for PATH. I mean, these are many of my colleagues, but they do certainly deserve applause. So, you know, dramatic reduction in reported meningitis cases has been seen. Basically disappearance of group A meninge, a stable fraction of non-meninge, because of course the concern here is replacement, right? If there's replacement with other meninge types, then the total sum gain may not be there. So you have to do surveillance and be sure that you're just not getting replacement. And also seeing the absence in carriage studies. So similar to what we saw in the United States after the introduction of Prevnar, with pneumococcal carriage rates to vaccine serotypes dropping to almost nothing. And this is really consistent with vaccine-derived herd immunity. You can get rid of the carriage, you can get rid of the disease. And here's just some of the information on the rollout. So in June 2011, Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, committed $100 million for introduction in even more countries, so Cameroon, Chad, and Nigeria. So as I said, 2010, Burkina Faso was a pilot. 2011, you had the Mali, the Niger, the northern Nigeria, and I showed you some statistics from those places. 2012, we'll move on to Chad, Cameroon, and then it will go even further through 2016. So where the meningitis project stands right now, it's obviously being introduced sequentially in African countries, but PATH is also working on a follow-on project, actually 2 follow-on projects. The first is to get the age of indication younger than 1 year of age, so to go into the infants. Now, it's hoped that this may not be necessary, you know, if there's enough herd immunity, but you'd like to get it down into that infant age group because then it can be part of the routine childhood schedule. So first you do a mass campaign, you eliminate the disease, and then you go into your routine control phase by having this given routinely to infants younger than 1 year of age. That's the ultimate goal. And PATH has a follow-on project to control the 15 to 20% of non-group A meningitis through a quadrivalent meningitis conjugate vaccine product. So again, this is step 1 because Men A causes most of the meningitis in that area, but not 100%. So the ultimate goal is a quadrivalent vaccine. And again, that's in progress. It's more complicated from a manufacturing standpoint. It will be more expensive from a manufacturing standpoint, so that's a longer-term goal. So I'd just like to give you another example of a different project that we've worked on, and this was the rotavirus vaccine project, and this is the project that actually attracted me to PATH almost 7 years ago, was to work on and direct the clinical rotavirus vaccine program. And again, I think you will see some commonalities between the rotavirus vaccine and the meninge vaccine, but again, this was started from the beginning as a partnership. Let's involve the World Health Organization. They make policy for the world. They have country offices. They are sustainable. The US CDC, who's done a lot of work in rotavirus, so a partnership with these 3 organizations. And of course, everybody in this room knows about rotavirus in the United States, but you know, it's really important to understand that rotavirus is the most common cause of severe dehydrating diarrhea among children worldwide. You know, so you hear about cholera and Shigella and all, and they are definitely important, but rotavirus is #1 when you do the surveillance, and it causes over 500,000 deaths a year. And global surveillance shows that 40% of diarrheal hospitalizations are due to rotavirus. And again, this is fairly consistent from area to area. Now, low-resource countries carry the greatest disease burden, and of the 500,000 plus deaths, most are occurring in these areas that you see here, with the red being the highest number of deaths per 100,000. So about 99% of deaths are occurring in these areas you see, thank you, colored on the map here. Now, the irony at the point when I joined the rotavirus vaccine program, which was partway through 2005, is that we already had 2 highly effective rotavirus vaccines. So this was a very different situation than the meninge, where we weren't developing a vaccine. You know, we had the GSK Rotarix, we had the Merck Rotatech. They had each been tested respectively in 60 or 70,000 people. You know, phenomenal efficacy results. We know what happened with RotaShield and the intussusception, and this is why so many children were tested. There